I'm not sure whether I need to say thanks for that or not, especially as I look around and see so many people who, who really know what they're doing in this field. And even though I've been here for a while, I still feel like I'm learning new things every day. And of course, the other thing is I'm about to try and follow Dan North. I mean, how on earth do you do that? It's like, if you think about television and nature documentaries, he's sort of a David Attenborough or a Brian Cox of these shows. And there's narrative, beautiful photography, he's lived it, there's a lot of experience there. And I feel like the guy that comes off and says, this is about when animals attack. And it's that late night satellite show that's on channel 8004. Anyway, let's see how we get along. So my talk is Team Design for Continuous Delivery. We're going to talk about three things today. We'll actually talk about perpetual motion. We'll talk about fish and aquatic animals in general. And we'll talk about bicycles. I hope that's what you're all expecting. Now, first of all, before I do that, I should probably introduce myself properly. So, as I said, my name's John Clapham. I'm an independent consultant. I'm variously described as an Agile coach, DevOps coach, Scrum Master, Success Facilitator. Someone gave me a business card with on. Not so sure about that one. The main thing is that there's elements of my role that are about helping teams and people achieve the best of their potential based on the environment that they're in. And so that involves, really knowing about Agile, and maybe that's 30% of my role, is understanding how to improve flow of work, how to improve team collaboration, and so forth. But then there's a 70% of it which is about, more personal issues, about the coaching side of things, sitting down with groups and teams to really unpick what they need to do to help themselves to get better. Because, of course, we're surrounded by intelligent, talented people, and if it was as easy as just following the instructions that we found on the interwebs, we'd all be in organisations like Netflix. But actually, it isn't like that. There's a lot of people things that need attention and thinking about, and that's where someone like me comes in. And this talk came about because Matthew Skelton dropped an opportunity bomb on me. The opportunity bomb was to talk at quite short notice at London CD to stand in for someone. And the talk title I was given was Team Design for Continuous Delivery. Oh, crikey, that's an interesting one. But I'll embrace constraints and see what I can build out to deliver on that promise. And so it really set me thinking, what actually is the difference between a team for continuous delivery and another team? Is there really anything special about a continuous delivery team and an IT team? And we can look at things like Agile teams, and we could notice that they're different from a conventional project team. We could notice that they're different from a Formula One team, or they're different from a squad in the military. So anecdotally, we can see that teams are different, they optimize for different purposes, and they display different kinds of behaviors. So what we're going to talk about is really two things: the differences that I see in continuous delivery teams and what makes them special and interesting, and that applies whether you're just thinking about the kind of things that you're hearing today in the continuous delivery space and just starting out, or whether you're a bit more advanced in your journey and your capabilities. These are the things to focus on. And then we're also going to look at something that is applicable whether or not you're doing continuous delivery, and whether that's your focus, which is the things that tend to relate all high-performing teams. And I hope in there we'll find something for everyone. Now, working with teams that are doing continuous delivery and trying to generate those capabilities, I noticed one distinction straight away, which is that they're not teams that think alone. The successful ones go out and they talk to people, they talk to other parts of the organisation, and they work across the whole value stream. And this is perhaps not something that comes naturally, especially when we're thinking about agile methods, or particularly, I guess if I go for the jugular, Scrum done badly. Now, Scrum, when it's done badly, because it grew out of a history of being a way to allow development teams to just build anything. Ken Schraber's development teams were being torn apart by project managers, conflicting requirements, supporting systems, building new features, and they weren't getting anything done. And so Scrum was created to lock that down, isolate those teams, give them one sense of what they need, one voice describing what they needed to do, rather than all of those opposing views. But in isolating them, we codified that in Scrum, and then we found that if overdone, the teams become very isolated and don't talk to each other. So you get pockets of Agile, but you're not working together. You're not working in the way that continuous delivery demands, where we're always looking across the whole value stream and the organisation in order to improve flow of work and ideally get our cycle times quicker. So I think we can look to nature for an example of this, and I think this is an evolutionary aspect. Now, this is, have we got any biologists in the room? Because that would be unfortunate for me, as I'm almost certain to muddle up some of the terms. Okay, great. So these are apparently fish in a thing called an ocean. Is that all right so far? So what we're actually seeing here is mutualism, symbiotic relationship between the clownfish in black and the anemone in murky orange. And what they're doing is they are existing together to support each other. They're mutually dependent. So the anemone, which typically eats fish, is not eating these fish. What it is doing is using the clownfish to defend it against predators, and vice versa. Whenever something big comes along and wants to eat the clownfish, they can go and hide in the anemone. Now, what's interesting about this is that the way it works is that the clownfish has developed a special chemical signature that turns off the anemone's stinging defenses, which would cause it to kill any other fish. And this is an example of the kind of codependence and co-evolution that we want to see in our teams. We want to be growing together to be mutually beneficial. And of course, you could easily see the comparison with teams like Dev and Ops between these two groups. And you could probably extend that a bit further by also noting that the clownfish doesn't just rely on its chemical signature, it's also developed a remarkably thick skin, which enables it to go and have those conversations. If you want to do any homework on this, you could have a look at this film, Sharknado. Anyone seen this? Oh, you're brave to admit it. So this is just textbook co-evolution, right? What we have here is the sharks evolving with the tornado. The sharks require the tornado to make landfall to go across mainland US and eat tasty humans. And I'm just going to stop there because I feel like I'm out on a limb. The next type of evolution, this is one that we see a lot, but is pretty undesirable. This is asymmetric evolution. What we have going on here is whelks using this giant long proboscis gross footy thing to prey on fish. And this is a predator-prey relationship. And what's going on here is an arms race. Both these sides are developing capabilities. They are trying to, essentially, one is trying to get lunch and the other is trying to avoid becoming lunch. And this arms race develops. And this is something you see a lot with teams that are not evolving well together. And you can see it particularly manifesting in processes and the development of processes where we're not looking at the root cause. We could look at the handling of certain change request systems, which are to see this in action. So let's say that a group passes something downstream, they make a mistake, just even as little as one time, and you'll see the process will change to compensate for that particular mistake and try and stop it happening again in future. And then it happens again with a different mistake, and the process expands. Rather than looking at the root cause, we have this kind of arms race of mistake compensation. And the result is that nothing changes. Everything goes very slowly because we have an evolutionary arms race. We have asymmetric evolution. And the last sort is this. This is kelp. It grows about 60 centimeters a day. It grows towards the sun. Symmetric evolution. So in this case, there is a clear imperative. There is a clear thing that all the organisms are aiming for, and in this case, it's the sun, in order to get nutrients. And it acts equally across all of the organisms in this population. And if you think about it, this is what we require to really unlock our continuous delivery capabilities, to really get all of those teams to work together to achieve some goal. So, the first of my differences, the first of the things I think distinguishes a continuous delivery team, or a team that's thinking about getting better at continuous delivery, is a strong desire to co-evolve and an understanding of what that means. So the sun is really a pretty big, obvious thing, let's face it. It's actually visible today in London, which is very nice. But for our teams, we don't necessarily have obvious things like the sun to look at and to point at. we talk a lot about cycle time. It's a great shame that Dave Farley's not going to be here later because he puts this stuff so well, and I was rather relying on him coming in and explaining that stuff. But cycle time is one of our key metrics for continuous delivery across multiple teams. And it's to a first approximation. If you aim for that, if you can't find any other goals, it's going to work. It's going to be the sun. It's going to be the thing that all the teams will grow towards. But there's another piece in the Lean Enterprise book that I think is particularly insightful, which is make it economic to work in small batches. So it's not just about understanding where we want to go. It's not just about understanding the goals. It's about making sensible decisions in order to achieve them. So there's the infamous automate everything mantra. And I've worked in organisations where they have tried to do just that. But they've tried to over-automate things, and you see automation of processes taking many, many weeks of development effort, and it's a thing that they're running once a year. And maybe actually they don't need to run it at all if they ploughed that effort into not automation, but actually building a different solution. So this understanding of what it takes to work in small batches and the autonomy to make those decisions is key. This is Reinersten's view on how you can consider the optimal batch size for changes. And what he points out is that we have a cost, and if we have something like artisan making, we have high cost small batch sizes, so that's right up over here. And then if we have something like drinks manufacture, cans of drink, cans of Coke, huge volumes, very low production cost to keep our margins up. And we're looking for this sweet spot. And I believe that people in continuous delivery teams need to be very aware of this so that they can make decisions themselves as to how to proceed when changing tech, when changing process, when interaction with other teams, and to spot those opportunities. We should also consider cost, because there's time cost, people cost, engagement cost, all of these things. And I think Reinersten originally was just talking about money cost, but it's worth looking at the other types of cost, penalty, or tax that are inflicted by trying to work in small batch sizes. Everyone loves Toyota, everyone talks about how Toyota did a great job of getting this right. But in the course of it, there were some things that didn't go so well. My dad was out in Japan working in manufacturing, and he reported in the 80s, and he reported a time when you couldn't really get around Tokyo. The reason was that just-in-time manufacturing was causing demand for single parts almost. They didn't have their batch sizes right. And so the streets were clogged with vans with one nut in, or one bolt, one clutch plate. So their batch sizes were wrong. They might have been right in the factory, but when you thought about the bigger system, they were not correct. And actually, of course, those traffic jams began to affect lead times in the Toyota factory because they couldn't predict when the things they needed to do just in time would actually arrive. And just to really hammer this home, here's a typical blame chart, and you can see that everyone's nicely laid out in order of blame. And what we will notice is that for a continuous delivery, well, for a conventional self-organizing team, we might have a lot of autonomy in this one area. Our team is a nice cohesive unit. We can make changes, but just to our own domain. But the thing is, for continuous delivery, it's all about flow across all of this. And so if we can't make decisions autonomously as a group of teams in a useful time frame, we don't improve rapidly enough. We want to be in a position where this person here can go and have a conversation with this person here and say, look, this isn't working out for me, or what can I do to help you? And then feel like they can make changes based on that conversation. And of course, the longer it takes to make those changes, or the harder the perceived burden of making those changes is, the less likely they are to get done, the less likely they are to get better at delivering. All right, so I think the second difference, or the second significant thing to aim for, is this understanding of business imperative and the autonomy across multiple teams to act upon it. Okay, and now we're going to head into everyone's favorite, interactions. So here's a not untypical, but slightly awkward interaction. Continuous delivery teams, and high-performing teams in general, they interact a lot. It's how knowledge gets spread. It's how we discover each other's problems. It's how we give feedback. It's how we help people improve. But it's actually quite a burden on us as individuals and on the teams. This is how to think about the overhead of communications between developers in a team. And if you imagine that each of these lines represents a communication with another person. And of course, it is in a face-to-face conversation. You've got to remember details like, their job title, what they're interested in terms of their goals within the organization. You need to think about the previous conversations with them, what happened there. Biases, you need to remember what sex they are, all these kind of basic things. You also need to, increasingly, we're asked to have this kind of full stack appreciation. We're asked to be cross-functional. So we need to remember in this diagram 3 more domains, 3 more concerns, and 3 more ways that people express the same concepts. Now that sounds okay, but then let's look at how that increases with team size. So when we get to 4 people, it's a manageable 6 lines of communications, 5, 10, 15. When we get to a pizza-sized team, we've got 28. Now, you can see how this is exploding. It's increasing exponentially. We're about a third of the way towards Dunbar's number, which is a cognitive limit of the number of relationships that we can sensibly hold in our heads before it drives us berserk. Technical term. Now, if we follow this, though, we can see it increases. If we are in a team and we want it to interact thoroughly with another team, let's look at the anti-pattern of just smushing dev and ops together and saying, you're a big team now, get on with it. 45 lines of communication, it's a lot to hold into your head. And then if we add things like social networks, if we add our family connections, if we add the unofficial networks, this is a lot for us to think about, for anyone to think about. A lot of interactions. A lot of people get into programming because they like to solve hard problems. And as a bonus, they get to solve hard problems on their own without talking to people. And so asking them to behave in this way in a continuous delivery team, it's a big request. And we're all different. We all deal with interactions in very different ways. And it's important to recognize this. I'm sure you've all heard about, have you heard about this phrase, they're on the spectrum? Have you seen someone saying, they're on the spectrum, where are you on the spectrum? Well, if you go and look it up, the spectrum, it's actually quite hard to find. I found one here, autistic spectrum. And of course, there does seem to be a correlation between autism and high-functioning autism, above average IQ, and a propensity to be good at programming. It's about the ability to hold complex mental models in your head, work around them, understand the impacts of them changing, and reason about them. And so what we're interested in is recognizing these are actually valuable traits that we would like to harness, a diversity of thinking with different ways to learn. And so we need to recognize that both in ourselves, what we need to think and to act well, and also to recognize that other types of thinking are valuable to teams. This is a quote from Dr. Vernon Smith. Now, in 2002, he won the Nobel Prize for Economics along with Kahneman. He said, I don't feel any social pressure to do things the way other people are doing them in a professional environment. So just look at that for a minute and think about your challenges. I wonder if in your teams you're dealing with a lot of institutionalized thinking that you would like to shape up, that you would like to change, but struggling to find ways to get that across, struggling to get the changes motivated. And in comes someone who really doesn't feel any pressure at all, or at least will be able to spot those opportunities and hand them on to someone else. So diversity of thinking in these interactions is key. There's a big kickback against open plan at the moment, of course, and what we can recognize from this is that different seating styles and different office spaces will help with different styles of thinking and learning. And we should recognize that in ourselves we have different moments. So after this kind of big talk, this is a lot of interaction for me. I will probably just want to go and hide somewhere and mainline coffee until I'm awake again. So I'll be looking for one of these private offices or some assigned seating. We can look at, as an extreme example of this, we can look at Stephen Hawkins. This is his time traveller's party, which you'll notice no one's there. What he famously did was to hold the party and send out invites afterwards. And what's been keeping me awake at night is whether or not, over time, people will appear in this picture. Keep your eyes on it. There's two other really neat tangents to this, actually. I mean, first of all, what he's done is he's designed a safe-to-fail experiment, okay, which could have huge implications. So if a time traveler had rocked up, he would have been able to shake up all of his theories and previous thinkings in a moment, but without any real consequence of that discovery. The second thing he's done, which is interesting for our pipelines, is that he's designed an experiment to fail. Okay? In other words, he fully expected this not to work and that no one would show up. But if you look at the low cost of that experiment and the potential high yield in terms of insight, it was worth doing. Oh, and the other point about this, of course, is that Hawkins is an extreme example of someone who's had to adapt his environment to suit his thinking style. This is a great quote I stumbled upon at the same time. If users can approach you without a door or a hallway to make them think it over, you're basically, in terms of getting anything done. This is a real sysadmin talking about open plan. So this is the kind of thing that we're up against. Now, what we can do is to measure our interactions. And this is an emerging science. This is Alex Pentland from MIT Labs, who are also responsible for Google Glass. They came up with essentially the ID badge of the future. And it measures your tone of voice, it measures your energy, all sorts of useful things like that. These two are showing you how, in fact, wearing them is not at all awkward. And this is showing you the end results. Now I'm going to have to go quite quick through this because I'm running low on time. But what we can see is interactions between team members. It's all anonymized, and the colors are the teams. We can see the level of energy by the size of the circle, and we can see the amount of comms by the thickness of the lines. And there's an awful lot in this diagram that you can see just from looking at it. We can see that there's real high energy in this person over here. I'd be very interested to know what their role is. Do they have a place on the org chart or a job title that matches that? Or do we have some emergent collaborator? Do we have someone who's doing a lot more than they're getting credit for? See, the data is what's showing us this, not what people are reporting, not 360 feedback. Reported behavior is famously different from actual behavior. But with this, we can actually instrument interactions. We can see the blue team is largely a bridge between the other two teams. That's quite interesting. I'd like to know if that's a CD team. We can see some precarious communications between green and blue. There is just one line of comms here. That seems potentially dangerous. So let's have a quick quiz then. This is actual data from banks. 3 branches, obviously. Now, in terms of performance, they were measuring sales. They wanted to measure upsell of products at the counter. Which of these do you think was the highest performing team? 1, 2, or 3? Hands up for 1. Okay, about half. Hands up for 2. Few. Hands up for 3. Okay, so it's between 3 and 1. So in fact, the highest performing was branch 1. And they were quite interested in that because you will note from this rather fuzzy diagram, this core here is much more cohesive. There's a lot more conversation going on. But what they also observed, of course, is you've got 3 outliers. I had a look at the outliers. They were the interns. They were people that weren't fully onboarded into the team. They didn't understand the processes. And so they weren't able to contribute to sales as much as the other members of the team. And no one had realized the significance of it. Again, using real data to understand what people are up to. Particularly interesting here. Any guesses on what would cause this pattern? Got some high cohesion amongst a group of people here. And another one here.
Clicks.
Clicks. DevOps. Brilliant.
Different departments or different businesses?
Yep. Yeah, so it was both a combination of different departments and stairs. Stairs that actually took 20 seconds to get across. But look at what it did to comms. Conway's Law, so Dan covered this, which is great. Thank you very much, Dan. I have a rant about Conway's Law by proxy, which is that I just see so many people trying to slavishly apply the Spotify way of working and getting nowhere with it. Now, I'm going to have to march on. I want to talk about the secret sauce. I want to talk about what makes a difference to performance in teams. And you can hear me thinking that's because I've got about 5 minutes for the next 3 hours worth of content. And I don't want to make anyone late for lunch. So why should I talk to you about engagement? What's interesting about that to non-management types, if I make that assumption? Well, the first thing is engagement drives profit. And that's why it should matter to people that are strongly about the bottom line. We can see that companies with highly engaged workers grew revenues 2.5 times as much as those with low engagement levels from the DevOps survey 2016. It'll be really interesting to see if the new one bears that out as well. We can also see an impact on quality. Lower absenteeism, fewer safety incidents, fewer defects. That means picking up less issues from other people when they fail to show up or when they have to go away and fix some crisis. And if you're still wondering why I would want to talk to you about employee engagement today, just have a think about this as yourself. Who do you want to work with? This person or this person? There's a very human side to getting engagement right and getting people to want to commit to what they're doing. I'm sure most of you would much rather work with Smiley Guy. You'd probably also quite like to keep him at arm's length because he looks a bit wacky, but given a choice, you would work with him. So engagement is the extent to which employees commit to something or someone in their organisation, and it's how hard and how long they stay as a result of that commitment. There's a famous saying, people don't leave organisations, they leave managers, which is so telling about the influence of our peers. I'm going to skip the burnout antithesis and talk more about this. So the thing that unlocks engagement is discretionary effort. If we look at this graph, which probably means almost nothing because I doubt there's any data behind this, but this is widely used. What we're looking at is minimum job requirements, right? The have-to-do curve. This is the minimum viable job. This is what you need to do to not get sacked. And interestingly, everyone starts about here and they learn and then they start to contribute. But the want-to-do curve, this is what we're trying to generate in a high-performance team. We're trying to generate discretionary effort so that people bring their very best, want to bring their very best, and it's subconscious, you don't care about it. I'm sure you've all experienced times and teams where you've wanted to just get stuck in and do things you haven't had to withhold. And that's you bringing your discretionary effort. That's the difference between what happens when the servers go down on a Friday afternoon, who stays, who goes, who's in the pub, who seeks alternative ways to work. So if we talk about who is the most engaged of these three very quickly, A, B, or C? Votes for A. Just want to see if we got this, okay? Votes for B and votes for C. All right. Well, there's a critical point here, which is that actually happiness isn't necessarily engagement. So I'm pretty happy if I can escape my children, drink warm coffee, and have fast Wi-Fi. That doesn't mean I'm engaged with what I'm doing. And so actually probably person A is the one who's most engaged, thinking about the problem, looking at ways to hack and change things. All right, so I've talked about what we want. I've talked about what we want to generate to get a high-performing team, to get a team that is going to go out and really try and bring something like continuous delivery or DevOps or just change for the better to your organization. And now we need to look at the ingredients of our secret sauce. So Google had a go at this. They've got lots of high-performing teams. They've also, like everyone else, got lots of not high-performing teams. What they do have is a people analytics team. It's not HR, it's people analytics. They're using data again to look at how their people are behaving and what they can do better. And they had a wide-ranging project called Project Aristotle. You can look this up online. It ran for about 3 years, 200-odd interviews. They had metrics on it, 35 data points. And they came up with some interesting discoveries. The main one was they couldn't codify what was different about team performance. Co-location didn't seem to matter. Leadership style didn't seem to matter. I hate to say it, but Agile didn't seem to matter. Even diversity didn't really seem to matter in terms of what made the teams perform well. But they identified 5 things that did. Dependability, can we count on each other? Structure and clarity, are the goals, roles and plans of the team clear? The meaning of work. Do we care about what we're doing? And the impact of work. Do we believe that what we're doing matters, and that something useful will actually come out of it? I'm sure you've all worked on projects where you've given your best, maybe you've given your evenings and weekends, and then it's not seen the light of day. But the last and most critical point was psychological safety. And this is a big epiphany for them. Can we take risks on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? And I'm sure you've all, it might have actually happened today where you're in this room, we have a kind of team, we have an environment, and you've been asked to do shows of hands. And in theory, everyone should have put their hands up to something by now. But I reckon there's a few people that haven't, or maybe you've been hesitant, maybe you've waited to see the first hand go up. And that's about your feeling of psychological safety in this room. Now, Google was surprised by this outcome, which is unfortunate, because if they had a search engine, they might have found that Maslow talked about it in 1943. And what we can find is we can talk about learning. Remember Dan North was saying, ooh, the sound of you learning. And what we can find is that when we're trying to create teams that are learning to get good at something like decreasing cycle time or like improving quality, we need two things. We need high psychological safety and we need high accountability. Now that accountability is self-accountability. I believe in what I'm doing. I am going to go out there and achieve it. Not the kind of accountability that says, I'm going to get a kicking if I don't achieve this by this date. The apathy zone down here is quite good. Low psychological safety and low accountability. Meh. And that's what kind of leads to disengagement. Okay. So let's whiz through some things that you could do practically tomorrow. I like to look for little things that you could start straight away, because it's really easy the moment you get back from a conference like this to be inundated with work again and to lose sight of the things that you've heard here. And it's easy to say something like, oh, go and be agile, go and do safe. But actually, that's huge. The real world gets in the way. So you can follow your work. You can do a mini value stream mapping and essentially just go to whoever you hand your work on to and say, how is that working out? Could I do it better? What else do you need? Really simple, really quick. Be curious and welcome questions. So in so doing, you're role modeling and demonstrating that it's okay to not know things. And that fosters the environment of psychological safety. That helps create that magic secret sauce within the team. Rewarding the right behavior. You know, it doesn't just mean rewarding with bonuses. It means praise, comments, thanks, all of those things. Role modeling is the most powerful thing you can do. And often we are prone to a bit of creative loafing. We wait for other people to do it, particularly if there's someone who's called a manager or a leader. We'll just let them do all of this stuff. But actually, this is too important to leave to just one person in the team. You all have a role in this, in bringing these capabilities to the team and helping the team become a highly engaged team that you would want to work in, like the smiley guy that we saw earlier. You can ignore your job title. I always get in trouble for this one, but you know, your job title is a construct that was probably used to recruit you, and now, you know, within a month, it's probably largely irrelevant. You've realized what you could bring to the organization, how you could make a difference, and how that fits with your role that you've been recruited for. So disregard that. Think about the value you can bring and think about what needs to be done. And the last point is to think small. Now, thinking small has worked for a lot of people and achieved a lot of big things. So it's working for the British cycling team, well, for the British Olympic cycling team, and it's working for Sky, who have won they won 3 Tour de France's in 4 years. They, like us, have a socio-technical system. They started to think about it being better to do 100 things 1% better than one thing 100% better. And the thinking there is it's very hard to optimize a thing. You will to the level of 100%. But those 100 little things can be very small and very cheap to do. So they did things like whitewashed the floor of the vans where they repaired bicycles so that they could see dirt. And getting the hurry it up, universal hurry it up symbol from Steve, which is very nicely done and very subtle. So Brailsford, who led the team, he says the most powerful benefit is that it creates contagious enthusiasm and everyone starts to improve. This graph demonstrates the aggregation of marginal gains. And this is something that is well worth thinking about because we see this 1% improvement and how it starts to really take off. Steve talks about this with the death of continuous integration, and this is where slowly these little things cause a big problem later on. This line in the middle is not the giving no action whatsoever line. It takes energy just to keep practices good and fresh. Okay, I have approximately 2 minutes to go, you'll be pleased to hear. The way I like to think about this stuff is like this perpetual motion machine. Can you all see how this works? It can't not work, right? So you push it, the balls flop over, they hit the side here, and that propels the overall wheel further and further. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work in real life because thermodynamics. But we can use it as a metaphor for our systems. So team design and structure is just one of the things that we need to think about. It's not just our team capabilities that need to co-evolve, it's also all of the things around it in the technical ecosystem: architecture, approach, learning methods, process, the physical environment, the culture, and the consumers. They all need to be changing. So when we're talking about evolution and thinking about what to change for continuous delivery, we need to consider at least these things. And they'll both enable and constrain each other. When you've done enough on team design, chances are you need to look at architecture. There's a talk later about serverless. These kind of things that enable improved capabilities. So, summing up then, we can observe the successful traits for a continuous delivery team are this strong desire to learn and co-evolve, an understanding of the business imperative, psychological safety so that we can take risk and succeed and fail. Because if we're trying to achieve goals, we need to do that because no one has a playbook on your exact context in your organization. We need the ability to manage all of these interactions. And that's in two ways. That's manage as in schedule, coordinate, plan for, but also manage as in personally cope with. And that's why we look to changing our environment. That's why we look to adapting our teams to recognize the high level of collaboration that's required for continuous delivery. The fifth point, which I haven't talked about at all, but I'm sure will be covered later, self-measurement of achievement. This is here for completeness. And Bruce Barton, he said, when I consider the tremendous, don't forget the small things, when I consider the tremendous consequences that come from little things, I'm tempted to think there are no little things. And I want to end with a little thing. This is a message sent 1991, August 25th. I'm doing a free operating system. Just a hobby. It won't be big and professional like GNU. I'd like to know what features most people would want. And it is, of course, sent by Linus Torvalds. And that led to the invention of Linux. Thank you very much.